podcast. I am your host, Christoff J. Weihman, America's favorite five-star customer experience expert and the creator and producer of the Ultimate Speaker Competition and Engage the Stage. 6 weeks to becoming an even more confident, effective, and impactful speaker. And I am very blessed and grateful today because I have my new good friend, Jenny DeBolt, with me to share her knowledge and inspiration on our podcast. Welcome, Jenny. How are you?
Hi, Christoff. I'm doing well. Yourself?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm very happy and
Amazing.
excited that you are here. Before we begin, let me just share this with our listeners and with our audience. Jenny DeBolt is the author of Suicide and Sequins. She lost her infant niece by drowning, her sister and father to suicide, and several other loved ones tragically. She uses these losses to bring awareness to mental health, suicide, and suicide loss while coaching on how to live a joyous life cohesively with grief. Wow. Welcome to the podcast, Jenny. So happy that you are here. Suicide and Sequins, when I first heard that, and maybe for many of our listeners might think they don't go together. That doesn't seem to make sense. We're talking about something that's very dark and tragic and a heavy topic. And then you pair it with sequins. So, of course, we got to start off right there. Tell me what that's all about.
So after my second tragic loss, I had a hard time leaving my house. And there were days I would wear some sparkly stuff just to get out of the house. And that led to every 3-4 times a week. And then after my third traumatic loss, I started wearing them every day with intention because I ran into a GM in a back of house hall at a Four Seasons resort that I was cleaning at the time. And he had said, what's wrong with you? And I said, what do you mean what's wrong with me? I looked really nice. I had a nice dress on and hair was done up, heels. And he said, well, you don't have any sequins on. And it was really bizarre because I was wearing them like 4 or 5 days a week. And I didn't quite understand that it was really a brand, So I started wearing them with intention. Plus it takes a long time to invest in them and get your wardrobe going. But yeah, so it's just my way of living light every day and just showing people that we all have our stuff, right? And you can still live a joyous life even with. And it's interesting because I didn't say suicide to sequins. I said suicide and sequins because they're together. You don't move on. You live with.
They're cohabiting at the same time.
Yeah,
It's not
yeah.
So it's not that you are just preaching that everything is all rosy and fine, that you're in a state of denial, that you are rejecting that these tragic, terrible events happened. You're embracing and accepting, and at the same time, it said living joyously, cohesively with grief. That's very powerful. How did that? Well, maybe we should back up because I know for one thing, I've been reading the pre-release of your book, and friends, when the book is out, which will be very, very soon, I really encourage you to go and get a copy of Suicide and Sequins by Jenny DeBolt because it's so powerful, impactful, it's raw. I'm a very good reader and I'm a pretty fast reader, but this isn't a book that you can just, zip right through. Where do you want to begin? Because we have a short period of time. Let me just hand the mic over to you and let you share a little bit of your story without me asking a specific question for just a few minutes. Kind of give us a little overview.
Well, I'd always wanted to write a book, but what really made me share my story is I do a lot of volunteer work and I help adults process suicide grief. They're kind of like AA groups, but they're for suicide loss. And I show up in like I'm going to a party and sometimes I get looks from the Like, what is she wearing?
Yeah, it's supposed to be black. How come you're not wearing
Right.
black?
Exactly. And they show up going, she's in the wrong attire. Am I in the right meeting? I mean, many times I have to say, are you here for SOS, survivors of suicide loss? And they go, yes. And they're kind of like, and I'm like, you're in the right place. So but when I share that I have more than one suicide loss, which I actually have 3 very impactful ones, I don't write about one of them out of respect for the family.
Mm-hmm.
But I share that I have these 3 suicides, and many times I would see their face go, what? Because people compare grief. There is no comparison, but people naturally compare grief. And it's when I see those looks where I just was like, I have to share this story. Like, I have to get this story out on a bigger platform and not just people that are coming to visit.
Yes.
And many times when I would share my story with people, they would say, wow, that's such an interesting take on suicide or grief. And I realized I really needed to share more of it. And then I happened to get referred to somebody that writes books about difficult lives that people have overcome. And she said, I can't get that into one chapter. That was Michelle Faust with Lemonade Legends, my publisher. She said, I can't get your story into one chapter. And here we are, you know, and I share my story wherever I can just to help people. I mean, with any kind of grief, really, divorce, bankruptcy, breakup, even puppy love for teens.
Or even puppy passing for those of us that are
exactly
fur baby parents.
Yeah.
Jenny, for our listeners, Jenny was recently a participant in our Ultimate Speaker competition, and that's how she and I connected. She was referred to us by Michelle Faust, her publisher, because her story is so powerful. And on our application, or on our explanation of the application, there's a part that says, this is not our stage. Ultimate Speaker competition is not a place for people to preach. It's not a place for people to share their political views or debate. It's an opportunity for people to share their stories, their inspiration, their knowledge, their expertise, etc. And Jenny's response was, in an email that we were connected in, she said, well, this sounds awesome, but I can't promise I'm not going to say God in my presentation.
I forgot about that.
And I said, it took me a little bit of time for us to connect on that so that I could clarify, you're not forbidden from saying God. It's just that our platform is not one to preach from. So let me ask you this. This was one of your official, you're beginning this journey of being a speaker, an author, and all of this. You're already a successful businesswoman. You've had a number of businesses, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes, my most recent one is the one I currently have is a commercial cleaning company, Us Cleaning Solutions, here in metropolitan Phoenix area. So I've been very blessed. I started it this August will be 4 years, and we're already a multi-million-dollar company. So been super blessed. And to that point, I just was baptized September 2020. I was hanging out with a lot of Christians that were hiking during COVID and doing yoga, and they were all lifetime Christians. What do you suppose? I just they're going to pray. All right, I'm praying, and I kept crying during like prayer and things like that. And then I started to learn that was the Holy Spirit and understand where those tears were coming from. And yeah, this journey kind of took me there. I thought my journey was complete and I understood everything until then. So
Wow.
That really led to a far more powerful book because I understood everything. So
yeah, when you were on our stage, leading up to that too, you and I had at least a couple conversations, and what I would like to point out is that your book, your story, your message, what you share, it's not just the information of here's what happened. Here's these tragic events that happened in my life, but it's a number of things. It's you sharing the understanding. First of all, what struck me is when you talk about the words that most people use about people that have died from suicide. Do you want to elaborate and kind of share that to the audience?
Yes, of course. What I found was when my sister first died, suicide comes with a lot of anger. It's a zillion stages. They say there's only a certain amount of stages, but I swear there's like 20 in suicide because they are very complicated.
Sure.
But I was very angry. That's a very good word, actually. Angry, disappointed, confused. I spent a lot of time like that, even though I had a lot of compassion as well and understanding of where maybe some of that was coming from, that pain for my sister. But it was when my dad died that I really came to a full understanding, because I I know my dad wouldn't have done that. So that said, how did that happen? And I would get very defensive and
Hmm.
like nails on a chalkboard when somebody would say, so and so killed themselves, or so and so committed suicide. And killed themselves is an acceptable term still taught in the suicide community. I'm in complete disagreement with that term, because I feel like if that was acceptable, then people that have lost somebody to suicide would not respond the way that they respond. Because when you say that, you take away from the mental illness aspect of it, because you're pointing blame at the person that died. And like I say, we don't say heart attack themselves, when technically you may have been eating like crap, not exercising, not doing the things that might prevent, a heart attack. But we still have compassion for people that die that way. And we don't say they heart attack themselves, or we don't say somebody diabetes themselves. We say they died by heart attack or from cardiac arrest, or they died from diabetes. And I feel the same is true of suicide. We should be saying they died from suicide. I sometimes will say, if I'm in the presence of certain crowds, I might say died from mental health complications, because suicide is more of an adult word. And many kids, I don't
Mm,
know that I totally agree that they should be introduced to that word so
yeah.
young. And so if I'm in the presence of young kids that maybe aren't, like, I do volunteer work for kids that have parents that die by suicide or siblings, and then I use the word. But in other ways, when there's kids, I would use the, died from mental health complications, because technically it was a mental health complication.
Yes.
And I when we use these action verbs on our loved ones, I feel like we're taking away from what's causing the problem, and not giving enough attention to that. And we are giving attention, and it is getting better. But I feel if we stop using these action verbs, then we will get away from the stigma faster.
Yes. So it's really and that's what opened my eyes and understanding when you share that with me, because it's really a shift in the perspective, the phraseology. Words are super important, and and you talk about the compassion. Even when people are saying that, they're not intentionally trying to be blaming or hurtful. I don't believe, correct?
No, most times, if you're in the initial throes of suicide loss, you might be.
Yes.
Um, but no, not. It's just what we learn. It's
It's what
learned
society teaches us to
vocabulary,
say.
right? And we're not meaning it that way, but it does make an impression in our minds, and still create stigma. So I really think we need to get away from those words and come up with better ways to talk about suicide. Um, I say died by suicide, died from suicide, died from mental health complications, um, which is the truth. I'm
Yes.
not lying. I'm not dressing it up. I'm not twisting it around. It's the truth. So,
Because clearly what you're saying is, in most cases, like there may be some very, very rare cases, but in most cases, there is some underlying mental health condition. It may be coupled with some kind of additional illness of addiction of some sort, right?
mhm.
Self harm, these different things. If you're, so you're, I don't know if it's a theory, your belief or your conviction is, to be clear, that if there was no mental health condition underlying, then most likely that would not have resulted in suicide, correct?
Most of the time. There are some rare cases, and not that I promote these cases. I don't normally talk about this because I don't advocate for it, but there are cases where I can understand, and that would be somebody that perhaps is in hospice, dying of cancer, withering away.
Yeah,
There is no way they're coming back. ALS, all kinds of stuff. You're not coming back. There is no way on earth you're going to survive. These are people that are really in the final stages.
right.
I don't approve of that, but it's so hard for me to talk about this because I do understand it. And I feel like that decision or that thought process, that might be of sound mind.
Yeah.
It's hard to say. I'm not a
But
psychologist or
these are not
psychiatrist
the
or a
ones that
doctor.
we're talking about that are
Mm-mm.
sudden and tragic losses. And you had mentioned earlier, you do so much in terms of support and volunteering. Tell us a little bit about that, and maybe how other people can get involved wherever they are, because in every city and every state and every town, I would imagine that there should be some opportunities. So can you share with us a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. I volunteer for an organization called SOS, Survivors of Suicide Loss, and that is run by La Frontera Impact. And what we do is it's kind of like AA. We don't know who's going to show up. We don't know how many are going to show up. We have recurring people that come. We have newbies. We have families. We just never know. It is adults, and they come to talk about their suicide grief in a non-judging environment. People that it's kind of like being around alcoholics or NA. I mean, people get what you're going through. So it gives them a lot of comfort that, okay, these thoughts I'm having are not crazy, and I can talk about it and nobody's judging me because everybody understands. So that is one thing I do. I do that 3 times a month. It's 3 of the Tuesdays of every month. And then I recently started volunteering within this last year for a place called Billy's Place, a nonprofit called Billy's Place. And they do peer support groups for families with a children focus.
Mm,
So most of them have lost a parent or a sibling, but there are some where it's, a grandparent. There's some odd loss relationships in there. But, and I specifically do the age group from 8 to 11. And so we do groups that are processing grief through play.
wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I do that 4 Mondays a month. And what this journey has really taught me is every person should be of service somehow to their community, and even in maybe the smallest way. You have your riches, your time. There's all kinds of way you can do it. You can donate money, items. You can donate your time. But we should be doing something to help our community. And that I wasn't doing anything to help my community before this journey. And I started to realize that that's really what we're here for, to take whatever journey we have been on and help others possibly go through the same journey in an easier way. But then there's people also where you can, go help the homeless. You may not have never been homeless, but you could go help the homeless. You can
Sure.
go volunteer at your church for a youth group. All kinds of things you can do to guide the future in a better way. And yeah, volunteer work has been so powerful. The people that you touch, the people that you meet, and they give you so many different perspectives too. That's really helped a lot. That helped a lot in writing my book too. There's lots of times someone would be talking and I go, oh, I never thought of that. Like one time I learned from somebody that grief is the price of love. And I thought that was
Yes.
so powerful.
I've reached that part in your book where you started to begin. That's a good phrase. That when you started talking about that, and that also was very enlightening. So could you share a little bit more about what that means? Because you say that the reason why grief is so heavy is because why?
because we have love in our heart that we give to people actively when they're alive. And when they're no longer with us on this earth, we yearn to want to give them that love actively, and we can no longer do that. And so we grieve because that's the price of love. And so it's just a beautiful thing when you're grieving. I feel like it's painful. Nobody wants to do it, but it is really a beautiful thing because it just says to you that you were able to give this immense amount of love to somebody and they were that much in your heart. It's a beautiful thing, grief. It says a lot more than just the pain.
Because they are no longer here, they cannot, there is no way for you to release and to share that, bestow that love physically upon that person, because they're not, of course, they're, in their afterlife.
You can't hug, you can't talk, you can't see them. You have to bottle up this love. And interestingly enough, we always say it leads to a hole in our heart. And it does really. It's interesting because you got to bottle all this love up, but it like leaves this hole where you have to bottle it up. So it's quite interesting. But I think grief is a beautiful thing. It just reminds us of the love that we experience in this life.
So that's another thing you talk about in your book, both the aspect of people that are struggling with mental health wellness, I guess. And then that a lot of times it can lead to these tragic results because they don't talk about it, and people think that they shouldn't talk about it because it's protecting the person from themselves. But in fact, as you stated in your book, it does the opposite, correct?
One of my biggest regrets, and I'm still in counseling and hypnotherapy for this because I still do carry a lot of what I feel is real guilt, and not regret. It is regret as well, but we have this big white elephant in the room, and because it's uncomfortable, we avoid it and we don't talk about it. But we should. But we need to learn how to talk about how we're feeling. Find a friend that you can trust telling them, or family member that you can trust, just talking about how you feel, and you're not going to be judged and they're not going to freak out and, oh my gosh, I can't, like just somebody you can talk to. And when you have something in the family, just talk about it. Just, how are you feeling? How are you doing? I know that you're processing a lot, and is there anything I can help you with? And to that point, a lot of times people need counseling, but they're so mentally unwell. What person that is mentally unwell? I mean, I've been there a gazillion times. Who wants to, if you're laying in bed depressed or schizophrenia or whatever it is, right? Who's going to actually get on the computer, look up their provider network, find counselors or psychiatrists and go through and call them all and see who has openings? Because half the time they say they have openings, and then you call them and they go, oh no, we haven't updated, we don't have openings. I mean, these are the types of things you can help somebody in mental illness in the times at their lows or their difficulties. We can help them in that way where they may not want help, but perhaps we can just give it to them anyhow. Let me just help you get some help. I'll even drive you to your appointment because I know you're not going to want to feel like going. But yeah, I mean, these are the things we just need to talk about them and not avoid them, because sometimes the avoided conversations lead to big things.
And that also, I believe you mentioned in your book, that also applies to then people who are in grief. Same thing, right? A lot of times now something, and whether it was suicide or, as you mentioned, there's many types of grief. And oftentimes, again, because when we know somebody's going through difficulty, when we think, oh, maybe it's a sensitive subject or touchy subject, so we avoid that oftentimes. And you are advocating that that is not what we want to do, because it doesn't support them, right? If somebody's just gone through a difficult divorce or any kind of death in the family, sometimes we try to avoid that. Maybe you want to give a little bit more input on that.
Well, yeah, and it can be even deeper than that, right? So let's just use divorce, for example. Let's say you're going through a divorce and nobody's talking to you about it. You might be wrongfully processing that as everyone's judging me. They all can't believe I'm doing this. They don't agree with me. I mean, because a divorce is so hard to even come to that decision. And you leave that person to decide what everybody's thinking. And, oftentimes our self-talk when we're in bad times is not good. It usually is very paranoid. It's very self-defecating. It's just not good. So to just not talk to them about it leaves it to their interpretation of what you're thinking. And while we shouldn't really be concerned with what other people think, we're humans and we do concern ourselves with other people's things. And not talking about stuff. I was watching a show the other day. I think it was Outer Range, but there was one of the main characters was talking to a young girl. I think in the show she's 11 or 12. And they didn't want to talk to her about something that was a difficult subject. And she said, well, not talking about it hurts too. Oh, like right when she said it, I was like, that's exactly what happens. Like we think, well, we just won't talk about it so nobody gets hurt, but that hurts too.
Sure.
Not talking about it. And I just wish, especially with men, I mean, men really bottle up their emotions. We always use these terms, man up, suck it up, be a man about it. And in those terms, when we use those, be the man of the house, we tend to lead to this stigma that men shouldn't be talking about their emotions and shouldn't even be having these problems, but we all do, whatever your gender is. So yeah, I really believe we need to be talking to each other about it. And now, like, something happened with both of my boys. I have two boys, they're 24 and 26. Something happened with both my boys yesterday. Now today I could choose to not call them because they're both difficult subjects, and I don't know if they want to talk to me about it, but I don't care. I'm calling them today and I'm going to talk to them about it, because that is the biggest lesson I have learned in my losses.
Wow.
One of the biggest lessons. Don't wait to talk about it.
And even if it might be uncomfortable and have tension, you're showing care, you're opening the door, you're making it so that, and just because we offer to have somebody, share about their situation, that doesn't mean that it's always the right time, correct?
And and they may not do it.
But you are opening the door and you're being persistent and you're establishing that, hey, I am here. And like you said, with, this situation, I don't care if they don't want to talk about it, but at least I'm going to let them know. Right.
Right. And you're guiding them to open up. And I know that we talk about in our culture about not just showing up at people's houses, but I feel like sometimes we should.
Just show up at the door.
I do. I feel like if you know that somebody's having a difficult time, I don't know, pick up some food and go over there, pick up a shake, whatever. I mean, just go over, bring some water. I don't care. Like, I mean, drinking water just sends a message to your body that everything's okay. I don't care. Just bring water for all I care. But just having somebody in their presence that cares can do so much for the soul. So
so your book is coming out very soon. And by the time of this podcast, it's probably already launched. I'm guessing you are already a #1 best-selling author. You are beginning this speaking journey. Tell us what maybe your big vision or next steps, a big goal for you, Jenny.
Yeah, so once I have this book rolled out and buttoned up, it will be releasing right around the 26th. I'm kind of at the mercy of Amazon right now.
Of May. Of May 2022.
Yeah. So I really wanted to get it out this month because it's Mental Health Awareness Month. So, but my next step is to start a nonprofit. And I feel like something that's missing in suicide prevention is non-clinical approach. So a few months ago, somebody came to me and was like, I can't get help. I don't have good insurance. I don't know where to go. I've turned everywhere. I keep getting declined. And I, they don't have anywhere non-clinical to go if they are at suicide risk or have attempted. And for example, I think that my dad purposely didn't want to go get help because he felt like maybe he might have a ding on his medical record, which I totally disagree with. But if there was some kind of non-clinical way to get help, I think that would help a lot of people. So what I want to do, or what I'm going to do, is I'm going to start a nonprofit, and the goal will be to have peer support groups that are trained. We'll have trained volunteers, and those that come to the group will go through training as well. And it will be anybody that's at risk for suicide or has attempted and needs help. And we will first, on the first portion, learn a coping skill. So, 1 week we might do drumming. The next week we might go outside, take our shoes off and walk on the grass. The next week, breathing. I mean, there's so many things for coping, but we'll be teaching on a coping skill, and then we will break out into group. And in my long-term vision, when it's bigger, is we'll break out into group, like walks of life. So veterans, parents, young adults, people that are in similar walks of life.
Wow.
So
And
that's what I want to do, and I'm going to do. I just am finishing the book and then
sure.
filing for my nonprofit.
Congratulations. That's a huge vision, and clearly very, very important and valuable. The work that you do is just so needed. I want to go back to something that you mentioned a moment ago and talk a little bit more about, and that's the words that we speak, the things that we say, and especially to ourselves, our self-talk. People that know me know that I'm a big believer in affirmations and declarations and speaking things out loud. And, I'm a fan or a mentee of Les Brown. And he says, I don't know you, but I know something about you. I know that you have greatness within you. And I often will, when I'm leading a group, turn to somebody and say, you have greatness within you. And it's just so important, the words that we say to each other, to ourselves, whether silently or out loud. What do you do? Because you have had, if I read your bio and that was just a part of it, what you have experienced is way more than the average person. The average person has not had a family member or a close loved one. They may have known someone that has died of suicide, but you've had much tragic loss. How do you start your day, or how do you, it can't just be you wake up, you get dressed, and I'm going to put on sequins, and that's the thing that's going to do it for me. How do you start your day, or what is your self-talk like?
So just like everything, the way that I start my day kind of goes through spurts. Like I'll journal for a few months I'll read affirmations, a few months I kind of get off task. But I'll tell you what I do consistently, no matter what. If somebody that's new to this, I highly recommend journaling, because even journaling the same affirmation every day, because your handwriting speaks far more volumes to your subconscious than print.
Yes.
So I highly recommend that to people. But I also like to have people do this exercise, like go to the mirror and say to yourself with your name, look yourself in the eye. It's super hard, and be prepared for most of us to cry doing it. But look yourself in the mirror, in the eyes. Don't leave your eyes.
Okay.
And say, I love you, Jenny. I really love you. You are an amazing being, and you are going to go places. I forgive you for anything you've done that you perceive as wrong. You are amazing. I love you. There's so many things you can say, but you need to, one, say, I love you, Jenny. I really love you. And somewhere in there, you tell yourself how awesome you are, and you forgive yourself.
Wow.
And
this is like even if
weeks.
My name is not Jenny.
Yeah. Exactly.
I don't mean to make light of it. Everybody say I love you, Jenny.
Always Jenny. You have to say your name because you're speaking to yourself. You're being very direct. And have you ever done this exercise, Christoff?
I have.
Did you cry?
I don't know if I cried, but it's uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And
oftentimes you'll look away.
It's not normal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I thank you for the reminder because it's been a long time. See, I talk about saying things out loud, and that's not easy in itself. You're taking it to a different level because you have to focus. You're inviting us to focus on ourselves in the mirror. Now, don't do it while you're driving, please, right?
Right.
But in the morning, what a powerful way. And maybe what happens if your kids or your spouse or somebody walks in, they might say, "You're nutty. What are you doing?" Right? But it's so powerful and it's simple. It didn't cost any money. You didn't have to call anybody. You didn't have to go anywhere. You didn't have to have a counselor. But that is a very powerful, strong activity and strong step, right?
Yeah. And, the main thing we're missing in this life is self-love. So we spend this time telling everybody else we love them and showing them we love them in the ways that we show them. But we don't spend that same time verbally telling ourselves that we love ourselves. And you can give more if you love yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And believe me, you're still going to have negative self-talk that you have to redirect. But if you just know that you need to redirect that self-talk and you start with positive stuff, and I would start with the mirror exercise every day until you can actually stay engaged in the eye contact and believe it. Because I cried for weeks. I didn't want to do it. I would be like, because I had a sticky note on my mirror, like those note cards for studying.
Mm-hmm.
What were those? Anyways, the note cards we used to use for studying in high school and whatnot. Well, I had one of those up there and I had it written on there, taped on my mirror. And so every morning I would say exactly. Index card. I would say what was written on there, and it got memorized, but I left it up there because it was just a reminder to not forget to do it. And I couldn't talk to myself without crying.
That's a good way to start. So maybe, and it seems like a simple thing, but just what you mentioned, maybe a person needs to sit down and just write those 2 or 3 sentences first, because they're going to read them so that they're not thinking, what am I going to say, until it becomes something that they're comfortable with, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really, it's very, very good point.
I have a lot of carb behind the wheel time in my business.
Yeah.
And, that's when you do a lot of thinking. And so I'll be in my car and something crazy, not crazy, but I'll think something negative to myself. And I'll be like, "What are you talking about, Jenny? You're freaking amazing. Stop it." Like, I'll say it out loud, and sometimes I'll point the mirror down and don't be getting ridiculous. You're amazing. And that's it. We're done listening to that voice. I mean, redirecting yourself out loud is training your brain to stop doing that.
Right. Because if it's just internally, those thoughts are just incessant, right? And and you're trying to get away. But if you don't verbalizing is very powerful. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Our thoughts are powerful, but adding to it vocalization, definitely.
Sometimes our thoughts can be just a freight train. You don't even know where you're intending for it to go a certain place. The next thing you know, you don't even know where it's at, So it's really powerful to speak out loud, to just stop the freight train.
The freight train of those negative thoughts. Choo, choo, exactly. Get off the track.
Right.
Well, let me think. So you're starting your nonprofit. Do you have a name for it yet? Do you have an idea what it's going to be called?
I don't. I'm all over the place with it because I do want to come up with something that's an acronym.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want, you have to remember, I'm trying to reach all walks of life, men, veterans. Those are really important to me. And I'm not sure they would come somewhere that was hope.
Or sequins.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I'm just I'm all over the board with that. I mean, there was one point where I offered like a $500 prize to this group I was in, or anybody that came up with a name that I liked. And just not many people took it seriously, but people that did submit it, there just really wasn't anything to. You'll
It'll,
know, you'll
yeah,
know when you hear it.
it'll come. It'll come at the right time. I mean, the name
Mhm.
is important, of course, but what's more important is starting the foundation and planting the seed and getting it started. And I just commend you. I'm so excited for you. I'm excited for the book. The book is not easy. I think I might have said this at the top. The book is not an easy read. It's not a light read. However, you pour your heart out into it, and you really, again, you're not just sharing information, but you are an expert in this arena of suicide loss, of tragic loss, of grief, of living joyously, cohesively with grief. These are all um, interlocking platforms and thoughts, and it's amazing what you are doing. It's very interesting. I think most of us in the past handful of years have become aware because there's been some information on social media. 22, I think everybody can quote, and I don't even know if the stat is accurate, but every day 22 veterans lose their life to suicide. And I personally have done the 22 a day push-up challenge multiple times for 30 days. But
Mhm.
for the general public, we don't hear about, the people aside from veterans that are struggling with mental health illness. I have a quote, or not a quote, but we have a message from somebody I'm going to read here. We have a listener or a viewer says, I love the podcast. The mirror thing is so wonderful. God will help you with the name for the nonprofit. Teresa Gibson. Teresa
Ah.
Gibson, maybe a
Mhm.
relative or a friend or a family member. And we have Jasmine Wardlaw. See, people are now watching, listening. Jasmine Wardlaw, what was your son's name? What about something like remembering his name? So I think she
Oh,
might have
that's a
meant
really good one.
she meant your father or
Your
yes,
my sister.
your
That's a
sister.
great one.
Here's another message. Jenny shared an encouraging note with me that I have taped to my mirror. It reads, all glory comes from daring to begin. Michelle Tanny. Wow.
Mm.
It's very clear that the work you're doing, and I don't even know if you call it work, because I know it's a passion and it's a mission. Would you say it's a mission and a calling, what you are doing?
Yeah. Yes, because I'm always working at it, always. I mean, even if I hear somebody just speaking about it on the, you know, out and about, I can't help myself. Like, sometimes I'll just kind of put a little tidbit in there. Um, it's we can do so much to move our lives forward through um, all difficulties, and you know, this is really not something I would love to inspire somebody to do this. This is really not something that I can take on, but I'm hoping in one of my messages I'll reach the right person that will take this on and take off with it. But we really need to have curriculum in schools starting from kindergarten. I don't need preschool even, where every year, dependent on the age group as to how in depth you get into it, like levels of coping skills, right? We should be teaching the power of breath from day one of schooling. I
Hmm.
mean, what, for example, when you are breathing, many people we breathe in our chest, right? Because we're all trying to suck in our gut and look skinny. So we do a lot of chest work,
Chest breathing.
diaphragm breathing. But really, when you breathe especially to relieve yourself, you need to belly breathe so that your vagus nerve is the main nerve of your body. And you send a signal to that nerve that everything's okay. Because if a bear was chasing you, you would not be like, let me just sit here and breathe for a couple breaths, calm down. No, if a bear was chasing you, you'd be running, and your breath would be rough. And even drinking water, I mentioned earlier, if you just take same thing. If a bear is chasing you, you're not going to stop and take a drink of water. So you send the same message to your body. I mean, these are such simple concepts. You
Sure.
could teach that to a 3-year-old, 2-year-old. Hey, if a bear was running after you, would you stop for water? And they'd be like, no. Okay, so if you drink water when you're not feeling well, kind of thing. I think that there should be curriculum in every grade that gets further advanced and further advanced. I mean, you can get into like drumming. Why should you take your shoes off and walk in grass? Like, why connect to the earth energy of the earth? Why should you do that? Why does vitamin D help? And how can you get the most vitamin D? That's something that's more advanced, right? You wouldn't teach that to a kindergartner or even first, second grade. So it should just kind of advance every year. And I just would love to see that in the school system. It's just really not in my wheelhouse to work on that. And I'm hoping that message will get to the right person that can take that on. But we really need to be teaching people coping skills from childhood so that we can get to the front end of this proactively rather than reacting to losing people to mental health.
That's amazing. I want to add one more message from a viewer. Just begin. Excuse me. We can do hard things. And with people like Jenny coming alongside, the world is a better place. I completely agree.
So sweet about all these comments are great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Jenny, last words. And thank you for being, and I'm going to give you the last word in a moment. Thank you for being on our podcast, which is called It's Your Time to Shine. And you are the perfect person to be a guest on this show because you do shine. And it's not, as somebody said before in regards to, I don't know where I saw it on social media, it's not just your sequins. Please don't think that Jenny is certainly, I mean, you've heard her speak. So it's not just, the outward, the appearance on the outside. I'm going to put on sequins so that I have a facade. No, that's an expression of what you are doing in the world. But last thoughts, last words, Jenny.
Well, what we need more in this world of is love. And I fully believe that a lot of that starts with faith. Whatever faith you choose or want, I'm partial to God, but any faith is better than no faith. And then you bring that internal and you start to love yourself. And through faith and self-love, we will change the world. But you must start with yourself, and then we can love everybody else in a more productive and effective way. I really feel that the world is missing self-love.
Well said. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jenny, for joining us today. I appreciate you, and God bless you and the wonderful, amazing work that you're doing, bringing hope and light to the world. And this has been our broadcast of It's Your Time to Shine podcast. I'm your host, Christoff J. Weihman, and we'll see you again on the next one. Cheers and God bless.
Bye-bye.